I lead on the climate works for the organization. I've been working in this space for quite some time now, actually over 10 years now, and I'm very much delighted to be here again to share some perspectives and also ideas on what I think about this topic that I've been asked to present on, and just to also get your perspectives on what you think about everything that's being said here, and also to understand maybe what your expectations are in the great sense of everything. So maybe just to begin us off, I wanted to ask, uh, what are your expectations as you are coming to this call today? Maybe that is one of the questions I'd just like to understand as we begin, and then we can be able to progress together. So if you can just drop like a small response, like why are you here today and what are you hoping to get from this, so that I ensure that in my presentation, at least try to speak to also what you're hoping to get. I'm trying to share my screen, I'm not able to.
Mm. Yeah, the share icon,
Share-
it's at the below the screen.
Yes, just a minute. Maybe I'll be able
Okay.
to do that. Few.
Yeah, you're free to chat on the and give your response. What are you looking for today session? I see a few of you. Maybe you can also unmute. Feel free to unmute. You can see Seleka, George, Eve, Daniel. Feel free to contribute.
Yes. As in the essence of asking this is just that so that I don't come here and only speak to you on things that maybe don't really matter to you. So I prefer when I get a sense of what also you want so that we can try to tailor make it to suit your interests. Hope that is fair enough. Anyway, so I don't know, have we had any responses up to now? You can read them out.
Yeah, I can say Ren says getting more insights in how to lead for real change.
Mhm.
Yeah. Uh, Maybe it's because more people are joining in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you give like 2 or 3 more minutes, or what do you think? If you are happy for me to just begin, I can start, but I'm happy also to wait for like 3 to 5 minutes to see if many people are going to join. But of course, I'd like to be guided by you on that. But for me, I'm very ready to go.
Yes, we can start. They'll join as we continue. I can see Daniel has said would love to learn more on what exactly defines impact.
Okay, okay. So I'll now share my screen. Okay, I don't know what's happening. I don't know if you can maybe drop me your email. I just send you very quickly the presentation. You have it. The only thing I've changed is the date. If you can drop it in the chat, I can send you in 1 minute. Okay, can see it. Sent it to you. I think you are muted. I can't hear you.
Yes, I've received it. I'm just want to download it, then I present it.
Yes, but as he puts it on, I think we can just begin also the conversation. I think the big questions that we're going to be asking ourselves today is we're speaking about leading for impact, but maybe the broader question to also ask ourselves is, but why the youth specifically? And then after the why, we go to the how the youth can lead specifically for impact. But at the same time, we are going to be grounding our discussion in the climate and sustainability discourse. We are going to be discussing and trying to see what are some of the things in the climate debate that you're supposed to be well acquainted with to be able to provide the leadership that we might need. Of course, after that, also we are going to be looking at the question of what is the history of this thing you're calling sustainability. So, trying to understand where it emanates from, uh, who has done what concerning it, and also just to understand what are some of the legal underpinnings that, of course, describe this whole question of environmental sustainability and the climate change debates that we hear now gaining traction globally. After that, of course, also we are going to be looking at the whole question of what is governance from an environmental perspective, and also what is the interlinkage with the whole question of environmental sustainability. So you can go the next slide, sir. Yes. So yes, these are the questions I was speaking about. Why the youth? Just continue to the next one. Next questions also. Yes. So these are the things you're going to be looking at: the question of environmental governance and the interlinkage to sustainability, but also looking at what career paths are there if you would like to pursue this set of discussion to be your career, and what skills are you required to build so that you can be able to find your footing in this space of climate change advocacy, or maybe also environmental governance as a whole. What I can say from the beginning is that this is, in my view, a promising field that if people are well interested in it, I think is one that can open a number of opportunities for you both locally and internationally. And it's also a field that is interlinked with many other sectors of the economies, irrespective of the jurisdiction that we come from. So it's something that if you take it up very well and try to run with it, I think it's something that can place you somewhere that's very good. So we'll progress. Next slide, please. So why the youth? I think this is a very, very important question to ask ourselves, because in this discussion, we're not just speaking to any person. We are particularly looking at this group of people called the youth. And for those that are believers, I probably you've heard of the fact that where the apostle Timothy is being told by Paul that you should not let anyone look down upon you because you are the youth. And for me, this Bible verse from the book of Timothy is normally very, very important, because it gives me the strength and the courage to know that I can face anything, even though I am young, that I can still contribute to anything. And even if I face opposition, there's still that assurance that I should not allow people to look down upon me just because I'm young. But also, looking at it in modern life, we know that youths have the freshness of perspectives on any ideas that you have today. young people approach them with different perspectives. And this one creates some sense of new ownership of what has been there also. But also, of course, the freshness in perspectives brings about innovations. And this innovation, of course, also brings more clarity to some issues probably that we've maybe had not been understood previously very well. We also know that since the youth are young, there's a very high possibility that many of them are going to be living to inherit the future that we are looking forward to. So in this case, like one American president correctly put it, that if you want to, if you want to invent history, you must also start by inventing it now. So, and for that reason, the young people of today can start to inventing the future that they want to see. And of course, that will also will be the history for other people that will come after them. So, because we're inheriting the future, we must start creating it now. We must start to invent and put it into the perspectives that you want them to look like when we get there, like in our old age. And also, of course, also for future generations. Next, please. We also know that the youth are owners of energy and drive. And so, for that reason, if you want to drive anything that is able to shape the future, we need the energy and the drive of the youth. Maybe just to give an example here, we've seen the youth in Kenya and how they've been pushing the government to remain accountable and pushing for reforms in governments. We've seen that all the leaders that have made a remarkable mark in history, for example, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Raila Odinga in Kenya, or any other person you can think about, including the tomboyers of Kenya, that they were doing these things in their youthful stages. And for this reason, the energy that the youth have that cannot be taken for granted because it can be used to drive the change that you want to see. And then last but not least is the fact that the youth have the courage to challenge injustices and status quo. And for this reason, because of this courage, it's important that the youth are engaged from the onset so that when they are challenging the status quo, they're also doing it from a position of knowledge. And that, for me, is why this webinar series, I think, is very important to ensure that with the courage that we have, with the energy that we have, and also with the promise that we are going to inherit the future, and the fact that we have fresh perspectives, we should be able to do this from a position of knowledge. Because again, as we know that you can have all these things have tabulated here, but if you don't have knowledge, or if you have very little knowledge to what you're going to be discussing today, it can end up being more disastrous than beneficial to the society. So this webinar series for me presents a forum to be able to share some knowledge, or also be able to equip us more with knowledge that we are going to be required to drive the change or the leadership that you want to see now, but also in the future. Next, please. So now we'll want to drive into just bring on board all the points. We want to speak a little bit about the whole question of sustainability and where it comes from. So looking at the historical background. And here I'm going to be looking at the history, specifically trying to understand the histories of population growth, for example. That for a long time in human history, the human population has continued to increase over and over again. And this, of course, poses some few fundamental questions that are we going to reach at a point where we are going to have so many people in the world that the resources that we have on Earth will not be able to sustain them? And also, are we going to have so many people that maybe they're going to be detrimental to the world as we know it today? So some of these questions have been asked since, like, for example, in the 18th century, and many scholars have been writing about them and trying to find possible solutions and all these things. So, for example, there's an 18th century philosopher called Robert Malthus. He wrote some theory called the Malthusian theory, where he was looking at the question of human population and trying to see that how people are going to live in future. So according to this philosopher or scholar, he was positing the fact that at some point the human population is going to be so high that people are not even going to get sufficient food to feed themselves. And with that, the world is going to regulate itself in terms of the populations. But of course, people that have critiqued some of his writings say that he was so limited in his scope, in the sense that he never imagined that things like GMO, for example, genetically modified organisms, are going to come up and they're going to help, for example, in coming up with more and more food to feed the ever-growing human population. But of course, also this one is what also led to many debates. For example, if you've heard of the birth control debates, because of the ever-growing human population, people are thinking, how do we control the human species so that we have a population that is only able to be sustained by the earth? And so people also came up with some solutions like birth control methods that some are advocated for. Of course, for example, we know that the Catholic Church came up very strongly trying to oppose it also in that time period. But again, this population growth necessitated the formation of what was called then the Club of Rome. This Club of Rome was an informal organization mostly composed of intellectuals and business leaders whose goal was primarily to discuss the critical pressing issues of the world at that time. That was in 1900. But also, of course, this Club of Rome came up as a result of from a report that was written at that time called "The Limits to Growth" by the Club of Rome, which noted that there had been a high population growth from 1900 to 1972, and the increase, while some were seeing it as commendable, like I said, it was bringing untold pressure to the earth and its resources. So of course, people are thinking like, how are we going to be able to regulate the human population and ensure at the same time balance between the people that we have in the world and at the same time the resources that we have that are going to be utilized well so that to meet their needs. And from this report, the limits to growth, multiple initiatives have been proposed to world states on how to best ensure that there's a balance between humans and the environment we live in today. Uh-huh. So, yes, next, please. So, from this 1972, this report of the limits to growth, we see that the whole essence of environmental law is beginning to gain shape because the pressure from the human population was mostly being felt from an environmental perspective. So people are beginning to develop environmental laws to ensure that it regulates the interaction between people and the environment in which they live in. And in this phase, we see that environmental law is developed and several sets of concepts or principles which underpin its rules are developed. And some of these principles, we are going to be discussing them later in this discussion today. And then these concepts and principles, they form part of the overall structure of what today is called environmental law. And of course, also related to that is that they are mainly in the form of solemn declarations of principles of global or regional organizations. So in this case, for example, the United Nations is coming up with some declarations of or principles in which global citizens are expected to be able to adhere to. So in this case, different countries are required to ensure that they are there to these global declarations that are set out, for example, by the United Nations or many other regional organizations, as we're going to be discussing. So these principles have considerable influence in the operation and interpretation, of course, of environmental law as we know it today. Next, please. Next. Then here I want to discuss primarily the evolution of environmentalism. So environmentalism here simply means the belief in the environment, the belief that the environment is very important for the well-being of humanity. So for that reason, the fundamental belief that if you protect the environment, it's going to protect you too. So after this report comes out, we see that there's rise and development of environmental awareness and advocacy. So many people are coming up with crusades to be able to speak about matters environment wherever they are. And of course, this begins also to be embodied in the social and political movements. Here, mostly seeing people advocating for ways to control pollution, like I said, human population growth, and then the aspects of conservation of natural resource, restriction of the negative effects of modern technology. Maybe you're going to discuss this later also. What do you think about modern technology? For example, the AI that we have now. Do you think it's a good to humanity, or maybe it can be detrimental and hence it needs to be regulated? These are questions that began a long time ago, and I think they're still very important even to us today. And of course, also the adoption of environmentally benign forms of political and economic organization, among others. So we start seeing it from a social perspective. People saying, for example, they want to be vegetarian so that to control maybe poaching for that matter, or also like people being very politically vibrant on the question of us needing to protect the environment so that it can sustain us, but also to sustain them, also to sustain the environment that in which we live in. So environmentalism essentially is created with the development of treaties, convention, and other instruments of environmental law addressing problems on myriad environmental issues. We are going to be seeing some of these treaties as we progress in the discussion. But for example, some of the issues that were being looked at were the questions of global warming, depletion of the ozone layer, and also depletion of species. Some specific species we know that were being depleted from the earth, and as such, people are becoming concerned. So, for example, I know that we've had the idea of dinosaurs. That this is something that people speak about that it once existed, but now it has been depleted completely from the face of the earth. So the question is, how can we ensure that now we protect what we have today so that also future generations are able to enjoy and see what we have today? So some of these discussions have begun many years ago, but till today are still also having ramifications in our lives. And of course, because of this increased environmentalism, we see global environmental meetings coming up. So for example, we see when we're going to be discussing it, the Rio Conventions that begin in Brazil in 1992. Then after that, we see, for example, the COP, Conference of Parties. And then, of course, also we see the creation of global, regional and national institutions for environmental governance. So here, for example, we are going to be seeing institutions like the United Nations Environmental Program. In Kenya, those that come from Kenya are going to be looking, for example, at institutions like NEMA that come up to be able to ensure that the environment we live in is well regulated and people are able to adapt some of the laws and regulations that protect us. Next, please. So after these institutions that I've talked about, for example, the COP has come up. The COP is the Conference of Parties. And then we have also UNEP that is coming up, like to try and ensure or regulate how the environment is protected. A key and major advancement from environmentalism was the question of the development of principles or concepts that underpin environmental law. So from now henceforth, I want us to try and discuss these concepts and try to see how they fit into the wider concept of environmental law and how they are applied, both at the international scene, but also at the national level. So I'm sure that many of you have had the question of sustainable development or this principle or concept. So this concept essentially it evolved out of the realization that the world's environment, its economies, and the way it treats its human and animals in this case the inhabitants, there is a very close interlinkage. That the environment, the economy, and people, in this case, they are very much interlinked. The environment in this case also includes the animals that live in the wild. But you see, there's always an interlinkage in all this. So the question was, how do we ensure that there's a balance where the humans benefit from the environment in which they live in this case, for example, in terms of building where to live and all these things, but also in terms of extracting what it needs for its survival, in this case, maybe food, and also from an economic perspective, that what can you use from the environment to ensure that it meets your economic needs. I can give the example here, for example, of lumbering, where people are expected to maybe get timber maybe sell it to convert it into wood, and then wood into timber, and then maybe it's converted into things like tables and many other things that you use in our households, and maybe also earn income. But also for the economies, like how, for example, do we get maybe fish from the waters in a sustainable way so that it's able to sustain our economies, but at the same time to ensure that it's not depleted, such that there's an aspect of continuity in all the species that we have. But at the same time, for example, when using nature, how do we use it in a way that it does not jeopardize the well-being, for example, of wild animals? So, for example, if you are cutting down trees, how do we cut them in a way that ensures that the buffaloes, the hyenas, and all these things that we know, like that live in the forests, that do not lose their habitats? And of course, also as we do this, how do we also ensure that we maintain biodiversity as we know it, as we are, or as we're going to know it later as we progress? So this aspect of sustainable development was given much prominence by a report that was developed called the Brundtland Report, which defined it essentially as a development that meets the needs of the people of today while taking into consideration the needs of the people of the future. So we enjoy today without compromising the ability of future generations to enjoy their needs too, or to enjoy what we have today. Simply put, if we have, for example, let me speak about maybe white rhinos that we know that are an endangered species at the moment. Like, how do we continue to utilize their well-being today without jeopardizing our future generations? So maybe in this case, our children and our children's children, ability to be able also to see them and also to benefit as we're benefiting today. So this principle essentially calls for the environmental management strategies to be aimed at meeting the development objectives of the present generations without jeopardizing the interests of future generations to enjoy the same. As we might be knowing already, what really leads to environmental degradation in most cases is what people call development. That as you advance development, many a times you're forced to cut down trees, maybe encroach parks where animals live, encroach water bodies, or maybe also, if as we are developing maybe modern warfare technologies, we come up with technologies that are detrimental to the environment. So, for example, if you are releasing maybe uh, acidic weapons that maybe have acids to the environment, what is the impact of this to the environment, and maybe what does it cost, for example, to species, for example, that live in the soil? When you are coming up, for example, with fertilizers to be able to add to the plants that you've planted, what has this got? What impact has this got to do, for example, with animals that live, for example, in soils? Here, for example, I'm thinking about earthworms. Does it have ramifications on them or not? And if it has, what can we do to ensure that we do not kill these animals that live there? This principle rejects all precepts of short-term economic or industrial growth which ignore conservation measures. So sustainable development essentially says that you can develop, but you cannot develop at the expense of environmental conservation, that there's some limits to development also. And you can see that this principle has been enshrined in very many international declarations and outcomes. So, for example, we see that in Principles 1 and 2 of the Stockholm Declaration of 1972, paragraph 14 of the World Charter of Nature, and then Principle 3 of the Rio Declaration, and of course also Article 6A of the Convention on Biodiversity, and then also Article 3.1 of the United Nations Framework on Climate Change, popularly known as UNFCCC. And then if you come at a local level or at a national level, we see it's enshrined in Article 69 of the Kenya Constitution of 2010, but also we have the MCA of 1999 that was also giving it prominence in 1999. So essentially, it's a principle that has been developed at the international level, but it has been cascaded down to many jurisdictions globally. And again, also, as we know, for those that are Kenyans, we know that Articles 2.5 and Article 2.6 of the Kenya constitution clearly states that if Kenya has signed and ratified any international obligation, it becomes part and parcel of Kenyan law. So for this case, because Kenya has signed all this declaration I've cited here, the Stockholm Declaration, the Paris Agreement, the UNFCCC, World Charter on Nature, and all these declarations, means that all these now form part of what is Kenyan law. Next, please. The other principle that is closely linked to sustainable development is that of inter and intergenerational equity. So I'd like to define some things here that intergenerational equity is a principle that correlate very, very closely with the sustainable development. So here, like I said, it calls for environmental protection, not just for current generation, but also for future generations as well. However, intra is equity within generation. So here, looking at the question of poverty, gender, and vulnerability, and essentially here it just promotes the idea of holding the world in trust for future generations. So we say that for future generations, we are speaking about sustainable development, that we are speaking about generations that are yet to come. However, and these are future generations. However, for intergenerations, it also speaks about people that are going to come within our generation, that they are also supposed to enjoy the benefits of what we are enjoying today. So just to give an example here, that the principle 1 of the Stockholm Declaration talks of a solemn responsibility to protect and improve the environmental for present and future generations. And then, of course, also, if you look at principle 3 of the Rio Declaration, it speaks about the right to development must be fulfilled so as to equitably meet developmental and environmental needs of present and future generations. So this principle, in terms of interpretations, you can interpret it in two key ways. One, that development must meet the next generations to inherit a stock of environmental assets, e.g., for example, we can speak about green fields, clean air, etc. So no less than what we inherited. So essentially, if you've heard of what Wangari Maathai once said, that we have inherited what we have today from our future generations. So we must be able to use it and live in it in a way that will ensure that future generations will also enjoy what we are enjoying today. Essentially, it's also about leveraging or leaving the next generation a stock of assets which comprises environmental assets, technological assets, and know-how. And in this case, that it is good enough if environmental resources become trade-off for technology, as long as appropriate living standards for future generations are secured. Next. The other key principle that has been very much, I think, propagated at the international level and taken up by many countries around the world is the principle of public participation. So now it is a well accepted that public participation in decision making of whatever nature is essential for local level development and generally, and in the management of natural resource in particular. So I know probably you've heard of the governments in whatever countries you come from, where they've been saying that if they want to build, for example, a road, they're saying that the citizens will be called for public participation processes. This is essentially important because it aims to ensure that whatever development is taking place, that people need to give their voice into it and not just being seen as mere spectators in whatever developmental projects that are taking place. This principle points to the need to empower civil society in decision making and empowering members of the public to enforce environmental protection through judicial or administrative procedures. I know that people that speak about this public participation principle, and mostly about people that critique it, they argue that for many jurisdictions, and especially in Africa, it's only done as a tick box exercise where governments just call people, maybe they come to a room where they tick that they participated, but in real sense, the decisions are not being made by them. However, if you look at it from a legal standpoint, the people are supposed to be involved from the onset of the project, and their views are supposed to be incorporated also in the formulation and implementation of whatever project is coming up. Public participation may be provided through at least 3 legal machineries. One is entrenchment in national constitution as part of Bill of Rights. And 2 is public participation in the review of environmental impact assessments. So as you might be aware that if you want to conduct any major development project, for example, construction of a road or maybe railway or a bridge, it's recommended, or it's a requirement, especially for the Kenyan law, that the public is involved when carrying out environmental impact assessment. One might ask, but why is it important for the public to be involved? One is because environmental projects, or mega projects, sometimes they have impacts on the cultural underpinning of people, and as such, it is important that people understand what is happening, and they can be able to provide also ideas on how to preserve, maybe if it's some cultural ramifications that may be affecting them. Of course, also it can be done through widening locus standi for public environmental causes. Locus standi is a Latin word that means that like widely accepted in environmental causes now, in the sense that from a legal perspective, where it's required now constitutionally to ensure that whatever environmental programs or whatever developmental projects that are taking place, they take into consideration environmental consideration, so that it may not harm the people that live within the area or maybe future generations. Next, please. Closely linked also to that public participation is the principle of do no harm or no harm rule. This one is mostly regarded as one of the most important principles of environmental law. It regulates that behavior in respect of transboundary pollution. So in this case, according to Principle 2 of the Rio Declaration, it recognizes the fact that states have the right and responsibility to ensure that activities within their jurisdictions or control do not cause harm or damage to the environment of other states or of areas beyond the limits of natural jurisdiction. I'll explain this one here a little bit. So for example, assuming Ethiopia is building the recent very great dam that I think many Ethiopians are celebrating, it is a requirement under international environmental law that this construction of the dam does not have negative consequences to other countries, for example, bordering them. So, for example, looking at the water levels at Lake Turkana, are they going to reduce because of this dam? Or also maybe looking at the Nile waters, is this going to reduce in Sudan? And is it going to have also an impact maybe in Egypt because of the construction of the dam? So this no harm principle essentially is about ensuring that, because environmental resources normally are transboundary, how do we ensure that it does not cause harm to other jurisdictions or other countries? And if you've been following global news, you know that Egypt has been contesting the construction of another dam by Ethiopia on the River Nile, because its central argument is that this can cause far-reaching damages to its population and its economies, as we know that the River Nile is the lifeline of the people of Egypt. So continued construction of dams is argued by Egypt as something that is going to be detrimental to its people and its life as a whole, as a country. So here, this principle essentially seeks to balance between the territorial sovereignty of a state and the wider responsibility to the international community. That yes, you can use whatever resources that are coming to your jurisdiction, but please also ensure that these resources are also being used by other people, and as such, you should not cause them harm just because they are passing through your country or they are within your jurisdiction. These principles appears heavily in the 1979 Geneva Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Pollution, the 1985 Vienna Convention on the ozone protection, and of course also the 1989 Basel Convention on Hazardous Waste. So hazardous waste here is essentially harmful waste. That how do we dispose of harmful waste? How do we ensure that it does not cause damage to people once we dispose it off? This, for example, can be linked, for example, to maybe chemical waste. How do we dispose it in a way that is not detrimental to the environment, first of all, but also to the people that live in wherever area they are in? Uh, Currently, it is now accepted as a rule of customary international law. They do no harm rule, and this, of course, has also been captured in several advisory opinion of the ICJ on the legality of the threat of use of nuclear weapons, and of course many other, for example, hazardous waste that is being produced currently by by many states. Next, please. The other key principle that for me I think remains to be very, very essential is this one called the precautionary principle. So precautionary principle essentially is about being cautious in whatever undertakings we are taking, be it scientific or technological or whatever we are doing. That we have to ensure that we take care that it does not cause harm to the people that we are targeting, but also to the environment, and of course does not have ramifications, negative ramifications in this case to future generations. This principle developed to avoid the problem that scientific knowledge is often not sufficient to provide concrete evidence about environmental damage likely to arise from human action. So, as we know that when people are conducting scientific studies, many a times we don't know what impact is going to have to the environment. So, this principle came out to stem this danger that may emanate from these scientific inventions. It is based on the need to prevent damaging possible irreversible effects on human activity on the environment before the scientific community can agree on the precise nature of those effects. For example, climate change and biotechnology. It arises in a number of different forms concerning likely effects of actions, development projects, and also, like I said, introduction of technology. This principle calls on states to err on the side of caution. So always be cautious when taking steps to prevent environmental damage. Um, so these are just some case studies that I'm trying to give here, or case laws, that it is primarily intended to avoid long-term harm to environment itself rather than damage to harm to human health or from transitory environmental conditions. So while it might also be seen that, for example, whatever technology is being developed is not harmful to humans, that this should not be used as an excuse for them to just progress with it. But we should also try to look at it in the sense of how can it impact the environment in which it's going to be working in. And for this reason, also in the sense that if a company or maybe an organization is coming up with anything that is deemed to be detrimental to the environment, that it needs to take all the necessary precautions to ensure that it does not cause this any harm to the environment. And again, if by any chance people are able maybe to take such organizations or countries to a court of law, it is the responsibility of the company, the country, or the organization coming up with such technological innovations to prove that they are not detrimental to the environment and not the people taking the matter to court. So it's the onus lies on the people who are coming up with any innovation to ensure that it does not cause environmental damage of whatsoever nature. So here is what I'm saying, that environmental measures must anticipate, prevent, and attack the causes of environmental degradation. Where there's serious or irreversible damage, in this case, lack of full scientific certainty should not be used as a reason for postponing measures to prevent environmental degradation. Environmental degradation should be prevented from the onset, even if scientific knowledge, even if we don't have like full scientific knowledge to be able to determine to what extent maybe the damage might lead to. Next, please. And of course, also, as we know that when we are coming up with some of these innovations, be it technological or be it maybe modern warfare and all these things, we know that we cause some sort of pollution. So any innovation has some sort of negative impacts. It can either be to humans directly or maybe also to the environment. This principle, the polluter pays principle, uh, majorly argues that whoever is responsible for environmental degradation should be responsible for paying for the reparations that are required. So, in other words, the polluter should bear the expense of carrying out measures decided upon by public authorities as necessary to ensure that the environment is in an acceptable state. So, here I can give an example that assuming a company has been releasing some chemical, maybe waste to the rivers, and this river has been used by people. People have been fetching water from here to use in their domestic chores, or maybe also for domestic purposes like drinking. And now the people are becoming sick because of this water and because of the chemicals that are coming from the industries. From a legal standpoint, it's the responsibility of the companies releasing these effluents to the river to be able to pay for whatever damages these people are living. But also, if, for example, looking at maybe in a wider scale, where companies have been releasing lots of effluents, for example, to maybe to the ocean or to a lake, and in this case leading to high rates of death of fish, and as such jeopardizing the economic status of a given community, it is still the responsibility of that organization, company, or country to be able to pay for the reparations for the damages that they have caused. The polluter pays principle raises two main challenges if you look at it. One is that of causation, where who is the polluter? In this case, do you look, when, for example, you are trying to assess it from a vehicle, do you then look at the as the person that drives the car that is maybe releasing emissions to the atmosphere and hence leading to the detriment of the ozone layer? Do you maybe look at also the manufacturer, and maybe we're going to discuss this later, we can take these questions down. Do you look at the polluters, the person that manufactures the car? In this case, is it Toyota, Isuzu, or whatever car manufacturer company that you know? Are they the one responsible for the emissions that are leading to the maybe depletion of the ozone layer? Or are we going to look at the producer of fuel? We know that you use mostly, for example, in the African settings, we use diesel and petrol. So who is responsible for the pollution that we are experiencing today? Is it the drivers of the vehicles or the lorries that we see them emitting? Is it the car manufacturer? Or is it the companies, the Shell and the Total of this world that produce fuel that is used for this? For a car that fails to meet a minimum emission standard and is using prohibited, say, leaded fuel, who is really the problem? And then the other question that this polluter pays principle really raises is the question of valuation. That what is the cost of a polluted environment? How do you value? For example, if the ozone layer has been depleted, what is the cost of paying back a depleted ozone layer? Or if a company has been releasing harmful waste to the environment and now an entire ecosystem is dead, how are you able to value this ecosystem? So these are some of the two main challenges that the polluter pays principle really brings up. While the principle in essence, it's very good in the sense that the polluter is supposed to pay, pinning down who is the polluter or who causes the pollution sometimes become very, very difficult. And then, of course, also adding the question of how much is really can the environment be, how much can the environment be valued so that the company can pay back? You find that it can be very, very difficult. For example, if you look at the question of India, where we always hear that the environment there is so bad that it's normally like very foggy. You don't have clean air even to breathe. So how much is clean air? How much should the companies that have polluted all these years and that have led to this, how much should they be able to pay to ensure that people are at least able to feel like they're compensated? Next, please. think you removed the presentation.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
can
yeah.
take it.
I've clicked the wrong button. Just a minute.
Okay, no worries, sir. Next. Yes. Hmm. As we discuss all these principles, there's also the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. Yes, I've seen the question, and we are going to discuss it in a short while. There's also the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. So this principle is very, very important in the sense that it underscores the fact that states have different environmental concerns and responsibilities. So at the moment, for example, when we're speaking about the question of like climate change, we know that there are those countries that are responsible for the emissions that led to the climatic changes that we're living today. And at the same time, there are also those countries that are suffering more the impacts of climate change, yet they did not cause uh, this tragedy that you're facing today. Like they were not involved in causing it. So simply put, is that global North countries, in this case, the developed countries of Europe and not in this case North America, they developed their economies using fossil fuels that science has shown are the causes of climate change today. Whereas many countries in the global south, in this case, Latin America, Southern America for that matter, and Africa, and of course also the countries in Asia, that they are living the consequences of climate change despite the fact that they did not contribute to it. But we have a common problem that is climate change. So, how do we address this problem of climate change? This is what this principle, common but differentiated responsibility, aims to speak about. So, the central idea is that we have a common problem, but we have different responsibilities. One is that I polluted the environment and led to climate change, and as such, I'm supposed to provide reparations. So, going back to the principle or the polluter pays principle, but also the other of sustainable development that I want to develop as a country. For example, Kenya, I want to develop, but I want to do it in a way that does not lead to continued detriment to the environment, and in this case, like perpetuating the scourge of climate change. So how do I go about it? This is the dichotomy in which many countries get in. And for many of you, for example, that have gone to the COP process, the Conference of Parties process, which is an annual meeting where countries come together to try and discuss how to deal with the impacts of climate change, they always argue primarily centering on this principle that many of the negotiators call it CBDR, common but differentiated responsibilities. So if you look at principle 7 of the RIA declaration, it states that in view of their different contribution to global environmental degradation, states have common but differentiated responsibilities. The developed countries acknowledge the responsibility that they have in international pursuit of sustainable development in view of the pressure their societies place on global environmental and technological and financial resources they command. So in this case, developing countries have special needs to which priority must be given. Also, developed countries have problems associated with high degrees of industrialization and high consumption lifestyle. But if you look at chapter 3 of the UNFCCC, the UNFCCC is the United Nations Framework on Climate Change. It recognizes the principle and notes that per capita emissions of greenhouse gas emissions in developing countries, which still largely depend on fossil fuel, are still low, and thus they only required to limit their emissions in accordance with the degree to which developed countries fulfill their commitment to transfer finance and technology to them. So what am I trying to say here? Is that developing countries, in this case, Africa, Latin America, and some countries also in Southeast Asia, they are really looking, Asia as a whole, they are really looking forward to develop. And they are trying to look at ways to develop in ways that do not lead to continued detriment to the climate as we know it today. But for them to achieve this, developed countries, in this case at the global north, that is Western Europe especially, and North America, that because they develop with dirty fuels, they have a solemn responsibility to be able to provide resources, in this case, finance, technology, but also to capacity build developed countries in ways that they're able to undertake the development in ways that it will not jeopardize the climate, will put the climate in much more danger, is what we've seen initially. So this is, for example, why you hear many people also now advocating for renewable energy technologies. That for Africa to develop, for example, they need wind power, they need maybe solar, and not maybe oil and petrol, because this one will continue to contribute more emissions to the atmosphere, and that because of these emissions is why we have the scourge of climate change today. However, as we know it today, is that global north countries have always been playing tricks when it comes to negotiations and not providing the much needed resources for developing countries to be able to achieve the development that they want now. So this is why we member states, and especially those that have signed the Paris Agreement, they always meet each and every year from 1993. This is the 31st. In this year, they're going to have COP31 in Antalya, Turkey, where again they'll be discussing the whole question of climate change and how it can be mitigated, especially by those communities that are most impacted. Next, please. And of course, also linked to that common but differentiated responsibility is the principle of international cooperation. And this principle is very, very important because, as we know, no country can claim to have its own microclimate. So, like, you can say the environment or the climate we live in is transboundary. So, for this reason, many international problems are in nature, such that if you have global warming, it will not just impact those countries that cause the harm, but it will impact everybody. So if temperatures are rising in India, there's a very high chance that there will also be ramifications in Kenya. If maybe coral reefs are being in Mombasa, on the coastal of Kenya, this will have also ramification in other jurisdictions that are not even near to this country. So for this reason, therefore, there's need to ensure that there's global cooperation or international cooperations to address environmental concerns as a unit and not as separate or individual states. So what I've already said is vital ecosystems. Of course, they straddle international boundaries. For example, you can also just look at the case of Lake Victoria. Lake Victoria is in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. So if you bring any harm to it in Kenya, it means that Tanzanians will feel it and Ugandans will feel it. So how do we work together as countries in the East African region to be able to protect this precious resource? At the same time, also, we can look at the case of River Nile again, that it begins from Uganda and goes all the way to Egypt. So as it's passing through all these other countries, how do we ensure that it's being used in a sustainable way and it does not, so that one country's use does not jeopardize other countries' ability to use it also and meet its needs. And environmental pollution posing great danger to many countries in the international community have their sources in different countries. I think I already said this. So this also calls, of course, for that international cooperation. And here also there's a greater call to international developed countries, in this case again the global north, and to be able to fulfill their commitment to transfer finance and technology to developing countries so that they can be able to meet their development without jeopardizing the ability of other countries maybe to use whatever resources that were within their jurisdictions. Next, please. This is more or less the same to of course international cooperation also, but it's underpinned by this principle called common heritage of mankind. There are things that are, for example, the atmosphere, that no country in the world can claim to own it. It's for everybody. It is there, but it's being enjoyed by everyone. And for this reason, countries must work in consortia to ensure that it's well protected for the benefit of all, that you cannot use it alone. And as this scholar called Immanuel Kant said in his essay Towards Perpetual Peace, where he claimed that the expansion of hospitality with regard to use of the right of the earth's surface, which belongs to the human race in common, will finally bring the human race even closer to cosmopolitan constitution. So here, for example, again, I'm just giving an example here is we know people are now rushing to go to outer space. So we now have, for example, the Outer Space Treaty that was established in 1967. And this treaty that gives also principles governing the activities of states in the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies. I think 2 weeks ago, we had this American group that was going to the moon and, of course, doing research and whatever they're doing there, of course, they know better. But the question is, how do we ensure that when people go there, because these things don't belong to anybody, how do we ensure that when they go there, they do not engage in activities that are going to be detrimental to the entire human race? Or whatever activities they do there also, how do we ensure that they benefit the human race as a whole and not just a select few? Because like the space is a common good. Nobody can claim that it belongs to them alone. But how do we ensure this? So this is why the common heritage of mankind principle is very significant to ensure that no state can lay claim to either of these spaces as the one of their own alone, and as such to ensure that each and every country enjoys the benefits that are there. So for example, again, just to speak about this is we've seen countries put satellite images in space. So nobody can claim to own the space, but we can all benefit from it in a way that brings benefit to the entirety of mankind, and not just a single state. So, for example, again here you can speak of Starlink internet that now is using satellite technologies to be able to provide internet to the whole of humanity and not just a few countries. Next, please. And I'm concluding in a few. This, of course, is also closely linked to the heritage of mankind, so there'll be no need for me repeating this. It's more or less the same to what I spoke about already. Next. Also, the common concern of mankind here, the common concern of mankind, the CBD, Convention on Biodiversity, recognized for the first time in international law that the conservation of biological diversity is a common concern of humankind. And in this case, and is an integral part of the development process. The UNFCCC, the parties to this convention, acknowledge that change in Earth's climate and its adverse effects are common concern of mankind. That climate change is not just a one country affair or maybe a poor country or a rich country affair, but it's a concern for the whole of mankind. And as such, it is important that people work together to be able to get workable solutions that can help also future generation. Under this principle, it is notable first for what it does not include, i.e., reference to states is rather humanity as a whole, and then the individuals whose concerns are at issue. Then, of course, there have also been scholars that have written about this. In his opinion piece in the Negimaros case, or also called Gabsikovo, speculated that we have entered an era of international law in which international law serves not only as only the interest of individual states, but looks beyond them and their parochial concerns to the greater interest of humanity and planetary welfare. So in this case, international environmental law will need to proceed beyond weighing the rights and obligations of parties within a closed compartment of individual states, self-interest, and related to the global concerns of humanity as a whole. So simply put is this, that there are some challenges that are in the world today that cannot be tackled by a single state alone, but they need to be looked at from a humanity perspective. And for this reason, try to get a problem that is human-centered and not just individual state. Thanks. Next, please. Yes, so even as we speak about these things, we know that we are youths, probably some in universities or maybe some also trying to navigate through their career paths. And the big question is, after I've done all these things and I know all these principles, how can I provide leadership, especially from a career perspective? And maybe what skill set do I need to develop now to ensure that I put myself in a position where I can be able to benefit from the knowledge that I'm gaining from this webinar. So there are a number of career paths that one can get from a climate and sustainability perspective and be able to lead effectively. One, and one that I think is very, very common, is government and international organizations, where you could be a policy advisor or a climate or diplomat, but also you can become a climate negotiator. I don't know if any of you have heard of an institution called Agnes. Agnes is a Africa group of negotiators, expert support group. They provide uh, trainings to people on how you can become a climate negotiator, and you can join maybe your country delegations and be able to be negotiating on behalf of your countries. For the governments, they need policy advisors from an economic perspective, but also from an environmental perspective, so that whatever principles, laws they come up with, they ensure that they enshrine the environmental component and the climate component in all these things. Like I said previously, coming up with any developments, governments are required to ensure there's public participation. And of course, when carrying out this public participation processes, they'll require people that understand the precepts of international environmental law, and as such, creating career opportunities for many people. For example, EIA experts. Then also we have multilateral and international organizations where you can be many things. In this case, you can be advisors, you can be program managers, project managers, and everything you can ever think about. Here, for example, you can look at UNEP, UNDP. We now have also World Resource Institute, WRI. We have, for example, WWF, World Wildlife Fund, and many NGOs that deal with climate matters. So the only thing that you need to do as an individual is to try and position yourself strategically so that you may add value to whatever work the multilateral or international organization is doing, so that they can absorb you in. And I can tell you, as a matter of fact, that there are many opportunities in the NGO spaces where if you align yourself very well in this space of climate change and environmental law or policy, that you could be able to do just a lot of things. And then we also have think tanks and research institutions where you can be able to think about future scenarios. There are people now in the world where they're trying to simulate how the world will look in future. So you could work in such areas and try to think ahead and try to invent that future that you want to live in. But of course, also there are careers like environmental economists and also climate policy analysts. In the private sector, for example, banks, we know now they have, for example, things called ESG, environmental, social, and governance analysts. And then, of course, also we also have sustainability consultants in almost all financial institutions that you have today. For those that want to work in the media, we have climate journalists. You can also begin your own podcasts or be a writer to speak about some of these issues that we've discussed. But of course, we also know that you have many NGOs, that in this case, civil society, that you could join. And of course, they also provide very many employment opportunities. The last question that you may ask yourself is, what do I need to do to get here? One is, of course, acquaint yourself with some of these facts, understand them, try to practice them on your own. So for example, if it's writing, if you like to be a writer, do you want to start maybe with a blog of your own where it can, do you want to begin your own blog where you can start honing your skills about environmental sustainability and then grow yourself slowly by slowly as time progresses, you become an expert? Or also, do you want to become a policy analyst and maybe try to ask an experienced policy advisor that you may job shadow them and then learn the skills slowly by slowly, and with time you become the environmental policy specialist that you want to become? And then, of course, also if you are at the university, try to focus on some of these extra courses that are provided that focus on climate issues and maybe environmental matters, and try to see how they fit into the subject that you're studying. You could be, for example, studying economics, but try to study an extra course in sustainability and try to see how that links with with economics, and then try to hone your skills in that. But more importantly, I think is important also that if you want to be in this space, to hone your public speaking skills. Public speaking and writing skills are very important in the climate and environmental sustainability field, because many a times the work you do, you will be required to present it. In this case, also of course, honing your PowerPoint skills, so that when you're given a chance to speak and present something, that you do it without any fear of failure. I'll stop here and maybe welcome any questions if there'll be any, but also, of course, happy to hear your feedback and yes, feedback and questions if you have any. I thank you.
Yeah, in the comment section, I can see some feedback. There's a question. How can leaders strategically align innovation, governance, and community engagement to transform climate challenges into sustainable development opportunities with lasting impact?
So yes, I can see the question. I think it's coming from Aremu Moses Abiodun. Thanks for the question, Aremu. So I think that leaders, first of all, I think the need, first of all, is to ensure that you try to align yourself with the existing environmental principles and legal provisions that are there to ensure that everything is well safeguarded. So, for example, if you're coming up with an innovation, are you, for example, looking at the principle, the precautionary principle? Are we going to be safeguarded as a community of the human race, and also is the environment safeguarded for that matter? So, ensuring that that this that this is looked at from a position of abiding by the existing laws and principles, first of all. Then, secondly, maybe just to look at the other part of your question is engagement to transform climate challenges into sustainable development opportunities with lasting impact. And I think this is very important. This is what is happening at the moment. And also, by the way, many innovations now that are coming up, people are looking at the challenges that we have today. It could be, for example, the question of water access, or maybe food security, because we know that droughts and floods are increasing in severity and intensity, and of course also the frequency. So the question that maybe leaders can ask themselves is, how can we come up with adaptive climate adaptation solutions that are able to ensure that communities, in this case, for example, farmers, are not able to lose their produce, uh, be it in the form of floods or droughts. And this can be done, for example, if leaders can come up with insurance schemes that could be able to protect farmers from droughts and floods. And also after maybe losses, after harvests, we know that a lot of food is lost after it's harvested, when it's being stored and all these things. So leaders can try also to think about the question of post-harvest losses, and maybe try to come up with innovation that focus on renewable energy that promotes, for example, drying of food, so that after it's harvested, it's not lost because of maybe fungi or maybe other microbial organisms that maybe may infiltrate the food that is harvested. I don't know if that answers you, but yes, this is what I would share. Then I see also, to what extent must leaders move beyond policy declarations to enforce accountability mechanisms that ensure verification climate impact within sustainable development frameworks? So here I think, yes, and I think that's a very important question, that we must move beyond policy to action. So first of all, I would say that the most important and significant move is to put policy into action. Try to implement the policy that you're putting in place. So for example, if you are saying that we want to ensure that there's public participation, are we doing it as a country or as a unit that you are representing? And then from that, try to ensure that, for example, you provide incentives that will ensure that the citizens also they try to follow and try to do what you're saying. And also, of course, having an aspect of penalties that in case we put in place measures that are not being followed by the citizenry, there is some sort of consequences that come with it. And as such, the citizens are forced to ensure that they comply with whatever policies are being proposed by the leaders in place. However, I think it's also very important to reinforce the fact that the leaders must also lead by example. And I think this is also a key important message for the youth here today, and that you want to lead with impact. I think it's very important that you be an example for what you want to what you want other people to do. So you must be the example of what you're preaching and all that. I think that's all I can see.
Yeah. And also there was a question that had been earlier asked. How can
Mhm.
leaders strategically align innovation, governance, and community engagement to transform climate change into I think that one you
I think
answered.
I answered.